From farm to fork, our diets carry a hidden environmental cost, the carbon footprint. Each step, from cultivating crops to disposing of leftovers, contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. In today's session, let's discuss our food life cycle. Food's life cycle involves 5 key stages: cultivation, processing, transportation, consumption, and disposal. Each stage contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, primarily carbon dioxide, CO2, methane, CH4, and nitrous oxide, N2O. Here's how. Cultivation. Fertilizers, irrigation, and machinery powered by fossil fuels release significant CO2 and N2O. Methane is emitted from livestock digestion and flooded rice paddies. Agriculture accounts for 13.5% of global GHG emissions. Processing and packaging. Energy-intensive activities like refrigeration and packaging production contribute 10% of food's total carbon footprint. Transportation. Food miles. How far food travels matter. Air transport has the highest CF, followed by heavy vehicles. For instance, air-freighted goods significantly inflate the footprint compared to local produce. Consumption. Cooking and refrigeration add energy costs. In China, the average carbon footprint of food consumption is 379.6 kilograms of CO2 per capita annually. Disposal. Food waste in landfills emits methane. Globally, food waste generates 3.3 billion tons of CO2 equivalents annually, making it a major climate challenge. Comparing diets, the carbon burden of choices. Our dietary preferences shape the environment. The comparison between meat-based and plant-based diets offers stark insights. Meat-based diets, a heavy meat eater in the U.S. contributes 3.3 tons of CO2 annually, with beef alone accounting for half this footprint due to methane emissions from enteric fermentation. Mutton production in India emits a staggering 482.5 grams of methane per kilogram, leading to a global warming potential, GWP, of over 12,000 CO2 equivalents per kilogram. Beef, a staple in many Western diets, emits 25 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of meat, more than 10 times the emissions of plant-based proteins. Plant-based diets. A vegan diet in the U.S. generates just 1.5 tons of CO2 annually, the lowest among all dietary types. Rice, a major staple in India and China, contributes significantly to plant-based emissions due to methane emissions from flooded fields. In China, rice has a carbon footprint of 765 grams of CO2 equivalents per kilogram. Switching from beef to plant proteins like pulses can reduce emissions by more than 50%. Global comparisons. Diets across regions. Different regions display distinct dietary patterns, each with unique carbon footprint profiles. India. Dominated by rice and mutton, Indian diets have a high CF, with rice emitting 1,221 grams of CO2 equivalents per kilogram, and mutton producing over 12,000 grams per kilogram. China. While rice remains a major emitter, animal-based products like beef and chicken contribute the bulk of emissions, with 25,281 grams of CO2 equivalents per kilogram for mutton. Italy. With beef as a dietary cornerstone, Italy's livestock industry produces 7.1 gigatons of CO2 annually, making it one of the highest carbon footprint contributors in Europe. The environmental impact of waste. Globally, 40% of food goes to waste, leading to the loss of valuable resources and increased methane emissions. The U.S. alone wastes 90 tons of food per retail store annually, with 2,500 tons of CO2 equivalents generated per store. Reducing food waste could cut global emissions by 8 to 10%. Solutions for a sustainable future. Addressing the carbon footprint of our diets requires innovation and collective action. Adopt plant-based diets. Studies show that vegan diets produce 60% less carbon emissions than meat-heavy diets. A reduction in red meat consumption alone could lower global GHG emissions by 25%. Promote local and seasonal foods. Local produce reduces transportation emissions. In India, where only 1% of food emissions come from transportation, promoting locally sourced foods could be a model for other nations. 1. Innovate in packaging. Shifting from petroleum-based plastics to biodegradable alternatives like polylactic acid, PLA, reduces carbon footprint by 78% during the life cycle of packaging. 1. Improve agricultural practices. Techniques like intermittent rice paddy drainage can cut methane emissions by 50%, and composting organic waste reduces landfill methane release. Raise awareness. Empowering consumers with information about food miles and carbon footprint can drive more sustainable purchasing decisions. In the UK, only 21.5% of consumers consider food miles when buying groceries. Our dietary choices hold the power to shape the planet's future. Transitioning to low-carbon diets, reducing food waste, and supporting sustainable practices in agriculture can create a ripple effect of positive change. Every choice, from the food we buy to how we dispose of waste, matters. Are you ready to turn your meals into a force for good?